Picture this garage door. Opens my late father's 1967 Shelby Cobra gleaming in the morning sun, and suddenly my HOA neighbor is screaming thief, waving papers, calling 911. 3 minutes later, cops at my door. The outcome, either I lose Dad's car or someone loses their freedom. What state are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and smash that subscribe button for Law HOA Karen Stories 88. The mechanical whir of my garage door opening at 7:43 a.m. should have been routine. I'd done it 1,000 times since Dad passed 18 months ago, revealing his pristine 1967 Shelby Cobra that now legally belonged to me after months of estate paperwork and emotional processing. What I didn't expect was Beverly Lang, my HOA president neighbor, charging across her perfectly manicured lawn like a woman-possessed, clipboard in one hand, phone pressed to her ear with the other, screaming at the top of her lungs about theft and criminal activity. The irony wasn't lost on me that someone who spent her days nitpicking grass height violations and mailbox colors was now making the neighborhood sound like a war zone with her theatrical accusations. Her voice carried that particular pitch of manufactured outrage that only comes from years of perfecting the art of complaint and victimhood, the kind of tone that makes normal people want to flee rather than engage. As I stood there in my driveway, coffee mug still warm in my hand, watching this 50-something real estate agent transform into a human siren, I couldn't help but think about how Dad would have handled this situation with his characteristic calm and dignity, probably offering her coffee and asking what was really bothering her. Beverly's accusations hit like a freight train loaded with legal documents and self-righteous fury that seemed to have been building for months. She was waving what appeared to be a bill of sale from Nevada, claiming the Cobra belonged to her client, and that I was nothing more than a common car thief who'd somehow infiltrated the neighborhood and stolen the identity of the property's rightful owner. The papers fluttered in the morning breeze like desperate white flags of surrender, but Beverly's war was just beginning and her ammunition seemed endless. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was coming undone from her aggressive gesturing, and her voice cracked with the strain of her theatrical performance that would have made Shakespeare proud of such dramatic overacting. Behind her, I could see curtains twitching in windows up and down the street as neighbors emerged from their morning routines to witness what would surely become the most talked-about incident in Meadowbrook Hill's recent history. The absurdity of being accused of stealing my own inheritance while standing in my own driveway wearing my father's old Air Force t-shirt wasn't lost on me, but Beverly's conviction was so fierce and detailed that even I began to second-guess reality for a moment. Her knowledge of specific details about the car's specifications and history suggested this wasn't a random accusation, but a carefully planned assault on my ownership and reputation. When the police cruiser pulled up with lights flashing but mercifully no siren, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach that comes with being falsely accused of something serious. Officer Martinez stepped out with the weary expression of someone who dealt with neighborhood disputes before probably more times than he cared to count during his 20-year career in suburban law enforcement. Beverly immediately launched into her prepared statement, presenting her Nevada paperwork with the confidence of a prosecutor delivering closing arguments in a capital murder case, complete with dramatic gestures and raised voice for emphasis. I calmly retrieved my registration title and insurance documents from the house, my hands surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins and the growing crowd of neighbors gathering to witness my potential public humiliation. The contrast between Beverly's frantic energy and my methodical approach seemed to register with Officer Martinez, who studied both sets of documents with professional scrutiny, while occasionally glancing up at Beverly's increasingly agitated performance. As we stood there in the morning, sun with half the neighborhood watching from various windows and doorways like some twisted reality show, I realized this moment would define not just my day, but potentially my entire future in this community and my relationship with law enforcement. The current political climate around property rights and immigration enforcement had made everyone more suspicious of documentation irregularities, adding an extra layer of tension to what should have been a simple ownership verification. The first major twist came when I suggested we pop the hood to examine the engine block, a move that would either vindicate me completely or destroy my case entirely in front of the entire neighborhood. Officer Martinez nodded approvingly at the suggestion, clearly someone who understood that engine numbers don't lie and represent the automotive equivalent of DNA evidence in theft cases. As I lifted the hood with deliberate care, revealing the pristine 427 big block that Dad had lovingly maintained for decades through countless weekend restoration sessions, I pointed to the hand-engraved inscription that read, D. Miller 1995, along with our old address before we moved to Meadowbrook Hills. Beverly's face went through a remarkable transformation, shifting from absolute certainty to dawning confusion, to barely concealed panic in the span of about 15 seconds, like watching someone realize they'd just stepped on a landmine. Officer Martinez examined the engraving with his flashlight, cross-referencing it with my documentation and taking photographs for his report, and I could see the moment when professional skepticism gave way to professional certainty about the legitimate ownership. The crowd of neighbors who had gathered to witness my potential arrest was now witnessing Beverly's credibility crumble in real time, and the whispered conversations were shifting from accusations against me to increasingly pointed questions about Beverly's motives and mental state. But even as Officer Martinez was clearly leaning toward my version of events, I noticed something that made my blood run cold and suggested this situation was far more complex than a simple neighborly dispute. A small commercial drone was hovering just above the tree line behind Beverly's house. Its camera clearly pointed in my direction with the kind of professional stability that indicated expensive equipment and experienced operation. The device was too sophisticated for casual neighborhood surveillance, too deliberate in its positioning to be coincidental, and too expensive for someone to operate without serious purpose behind the surveillance. When I casually mentioned the drone to Officer Martinez, Beverly's reaction was immediate and telling, like someone who just realized their secret had been exposed. She actually glanced toward her house with a look of panic before quickly composing herself and claiming complete ignorance about any drone or surveillance equipment, but her body language screamed guilt and deception. Her slip was subtle but unmistakable when she mentioned Harold's name under her breath, while looking toward the drone, confirming what I was beginning to suspect about this being more than just a random accusation from an unstable neighbor. The pieces of a larger puzzle were starting to fall into place, and none of them painted a picture I was comfortable with or prepared to handle without serious help. As Officer Martinez was wrapping up his investigation and preparing to leave with a clear understanding that I was the legitimate owner, I made what Beverly would later call the most audacious and foolish decision of my entire life. I told the officer that despite being vindicated, I wanted to voluntarily surrender my car to the impound lot, pending a full investigation into Beverly's claims, but with one non-negotiable condition: I wanted to install dual GPS tracking devices before it went into storage. Beverly's objection was immediate and vehement, suggesting that my proposal had somehow interfered with plans she'd made based on different assumptions about how this confrontation would end. Her insistence that impounding the car was unnecessary and potentially illegal revealed knowledge about legal procedures that seemed inconsistent with her role as a simple HOA president and real estate agent. If someone was planning to steal my car, they'd have to move it to accomplish their goal, and I'd know exactly when, where, and how they did it, creating a trap that would either prove my paranoia or expose their criminal intent. Officer Martinez looked puzzled by my request, but agreed it was within my rights as the apparent legal owner, and his willingness to accommodate my unusual request suggested he was beginning to share my suspicions about Beverly's true motives. As we arranged for the tow truck and GPS installation, I caught Beverly frantically texting someone with the desperate intensity of someone whose carefully laid plans were falling apart in real time and required immediate damage control. Her thumbs moved with the kind of urgency that suggested she was coordinating with other people who had a vested interest in the outcome of this situation, transforming what had appeared to be an individual neighbor dispute into something that involved multiple parties and serious financial stakes. The content of her texts remained hidden, but her body language and facial expressions told a story of panic, frustration, and the kind of desperate communication that happens when criminal conspiracies start to unravel under unexpected pressure. Several neighbors who had been watching the drama from a distance began to approach with offers of support and witness statements, suggesting that Beverly's credibility in the community had been damaged beyond repair by her public meltdown and false accusations. The final twist of this opening chapter came in the form of Marcus Rodriguez, the elderly gentleman from 3 houses down who'd always struck me as more observant than his quiet demeanor suggested. As the crowd began to disperse and Beverly retreated to her house for what appeared to be some very intense phone calls that could be heard through her open windows, Marcus approached me with the casual air of someone discussing the weather, rather than potential criminal conspiracy. He mentioned almost offhandedly that he'd worked as a private investigator before retirement, and that he'd noticed some interesting patterns in the neighborhood lately that might be relevant to my situation. His offer to help was subtle but unmistakable, delivered with the kind of professional discretion that suggested serious expertise and experience in exactly these types of situations. Marcus's revelation that he'd been conducting informal surveillance of suspicious activities in the neighborhood for several months added a new dimension to the situation and suggested that Beverly's targeting of my car might be part of a larger pattern of criminal behavior. As we shook hands and exchanged contact information, I realized that Beverly and whoever Harold was had made a critical error. They'd underestimated both the intelligence of their target and the loyalty and vigilance of the community. They thought they could manipulate and exploit The game was just beginning, and I was no longer playing defense against random accusations, but preparing for an offensive strategy against organized criminal activity. The next morning brought revelations that would make any reasonable person question their faith in neighborhood governance and perhaps democracy itself. Revelations that painted Beverly's accusations in an entirely new and sinister light. Emily, my lawyer sister, had spent the entire night diving deep into Beverly's digital footprint, with the kind of methodical precision and legal expertise that made her such a formidable attorney in white-collar criminal defense cases. What she found painted a comprehensive picture of financial desperation, carefully masked by social media glamour and professional success stories. Beverly was living approximately 3 tax brackets above her actual means, posting photos from luxury car auctions across multiple states, while simultaneously being behind on her mortgage payments by several months and facing foreclosure proceedings. Her Instagram feed was a carefully curated lie featuring expensive jewelry, high-end restaurant meals, and classic car events that suggested either exceptional financial success or exceptional financial irresponsibility combined with deliberate deception. The timeline of her posts correlated suspiciously with estate sales and auctions throughout the Southwest, creating a pattern that looked less like hobby collecting and more like systematic business operations designed to acquire valuable items through questionable means. Emily's discovery of Beverly's financial connection to International Auto Ventures, a company specializing in high-value vehicle acquisitions for overseas buyers, added another complex layer to what was becoming a very sophisticated criminal puzzle that extended far beyond neighborhood boundaries. Beverly's attempt to sell my Shelby online using photos taken inside my own garage was either breathtakingly stupid or breathtakingly arrogant, possibly both depending on her assessment of law enforcement capabilities in suburban communities. The listing appeared on 3 different classic car websites within hours of our driveway confrontation, complete with detailed interior shots that could only have been taken by someone with unrestricted access to my garage and intimate knowledge of the vehicle's specific features and modifications. The asking price of $180,000 was actually quite reasonable for a car in that condition, which made the whole scheme even more brazen. She wasn't even trying to hide the theft through undervaluation, just legitimize it through paperwork manipulation and authority claims. Emily's screenshots captured not just the listings but the crucial metadata showing they'd been posted from Beverly's home IP address using her registered seller accounts with established credibility ratings. The woman had essentially created a comprehensive digital paper trail of her own criminal intent, documenting her planned theft with the mechanical efficiency of someone filling out insurance forms or tax returns. When Emily showed me the evidence on her laptop, I felt that mixture of vindication and disbelief that comes with watching someone construct their own legal downfall in real time, while apparently believing they're being clever, careful. The sophistication of the documentation suggested Beverly had experience with similar transactions and confidence that her methods would protect her from legal consequences. The GPS tracking system I'd installed revealed something that should have been physically impossible according to basic laws of physics and geography. According to the dual tracking devices, my car was simultaneously stationary at the municipal impound lot and driving around the outskirts of town near a place called Westside Storage. The impound lot supervisor confirmed through both visual inspection and their own security cameras that the Cobra hadn't moved an inch from its assigned space since delivery, yet the backup tracker was pinging from a location 15 miles away every few hours like clockwork with mechanical precision. Either the fundamental laws of space and time had stopped working in our small suburban community, or someone had access to either my actual car or an identical vehicle with the same tracking signature and technical specifications. Marcus, who'd quietly positioned himself as my unofficial surveillance consultant and strategic advisor, suggested we stake out the storage facility to solve this particular mystery before it escalated into something we couldn't handle. His experience as a private investigator was becoming invaluable, particularly his ability to observe without being observed, and his encyclopedic knowledge of surveillance equipment, legal procedures, and criminal investigation technique. The situation was evolving from neighborhood dispute to legitimate criminal investigation with potential federal implications, and I was grateful to have professional expertise and guidance on my side rather than stumbling through amateur detective work. Emily's financial investigation revealed that Beverly's debt situation was even worse than we'd initially suspected. Based on public records and social media analysis, she owed approximately $200,000 various creditors, including credit cards, personal loans, and business debt, with International Auto Ventures holding the largest single note secured by unclear collateral. The company specialized in acquiring classic and luxury vehicles for overseas buyers, particularly in the Middle East, where American muscle cars commanded premium prices due to import restrictions, cultural cachet, and the growing wealth of collectors in Dubai and Saudi Arabia. Beverly's role appeared to be that of a procurement specialist, identifying high-value targets through her real estate work and HOA connections, then facilitating their acquisition through various means, both legal and questionable, depending on the specific circumstances and opportunities. The genius of the scheme was its exploitation of legitimate bureaucratic systems. HOA violations could be used to pressure homeowners into quick sales. Estate settlements could be manipulated through insider information and timing, and the complexity of classic car documentation could be exploited to create confusion about legitimate ownership and transfer procedures. It was white-collar crime disguised as neighborhood governance, using the authority of community rules and regulations to enable large-scale theft and international trafficking operations. The recent tightening of port security and customs enforcement related to Middle East tensions had actually increased demand for domestic acquisition and documentation of valuable items, making Beverly's services more valuable and her criminal activities more profitable. Marcus's tutorial on surveillance techniques felt like something out of a spy novel, but was grounded in the practical realities of gathering actionable evidence that would hold up in court proceedings. He explained the importance of patience, routine observation, and most importantly, maintaining strict legal boundaries while collecting information that could later be used in criminal prosecutions rather than civil disputes. His advice about photographing license plates, documenting precise timestamps, and maintaining detailed logs of all observations would prove invaluable in the coming days as our amateur investigation evolved into something that might support federal law enforcement operations. We established observation schedules that wouldn't interfere with our day jobs but would provide comprehensive coverage of Beverly's movements and any suspicious activity around the storage facility or other locations she might visit. Marcus's military precision in planning these operations was both reassuring and slightly intimidating, suggesting that Beverly and her associates had chosen exactly the wrong neighborhood to target for their criminal activities. The irony that a retired private investigator with federal law enforcement connections happened to live 3 houses down from their primary target wasn't lost on either of us, and Marcus seemed to take personal offense at criminals operating in his community. Jake Thompson, our neighborhood electrician, and a guy I'd always considered just a friendly tradesman, provided another crucial piece of the puzzle when he mentioned installing a sophisticated camera system for Beverly several months earlier, during what he now realized was the beginning of her surveillance operation. The equipment was far beyond typical residential security needs, featuring night vision capabilities, motion tracking, remote access functionality, and professional-grade recording equipment that suggested serious surveillance intentions rather than simple home protection against routine burglary. Jake's description of the installation process revealed that Beverly had been particularly interested in camera angles that would cover neighboring driveways and garages, ostensibly for neighborhood security coordination, but more likely for target assessment and timing criminal activities with precision. His willingness to share this information reflected the growing community awareness that something wasn't right about Beverly's recent behavior and the increasing frequency of HOA violations being issued to homeowners with valuable possession, classic cars, or antique collection. The neighborhood was beginning to coalesce around a shared suspicion that their elected representative was not acting in their best interests, but was actually exploiting her position for personal gain and criminal purposes. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow who lived alone with her 1924 Steinway piano, approached me during my evening walk with information that added another layer to the developing criminal pattern. She explained that Beverly had been pressuring her for months to sell the piano due to noise complaints from neighbors, complaints that Mrs. Patterson knew were fabricated because she only played during appropriate daytime hours and had received compliments rather than complaints from actual neighbors. Beverly's offers to help facilitate the sale through her connections in the antique music instrument market had seemed helpful at first, but Mrs. Patterson's suspicions were aroused when Beverly became increasingly insistent and began citing HOA regulations that didn't actually exist in their community bylaws. The piano, which had belonged to Mrs. Patterson's grandmother and represented both sentimental value and significant financial worth, was apparently being targeted through the same pressure tactics that had been used against other homeowners with valuable possessions. Mrs. Patterson's decision to confide in me rather than continuing to deal with Beverly directly suggested that community trust in HOA leadership had been seriously undermined by recent events and Beverly's increasingly aggressive behavior. As evening approached and our GPS continued to show impossible dual locations for my car, the anticipation was building toward a confrontation that would either expose a sophisticated criminal operation or reveal us as paranoid conspiracy theorists chasing shadows and coincidences. Marcus suggested we prepare for both possibilities while hoping for the former advice that proved both wise and prophetic as events continued to unfold in ways none of us had anticipated. The storage facility ping had become regular enough to suggest scheduled activity, and our observation schedule was designed to catch whatever was happening during those mysterious movement windows when the GPS indicated activity at the remote location. Beverly's increasing desperation was becoming obvious through her social media posts and neighborhood interactions, suggesting that whatever timeline she was operating under was accelerating beyond her control and forcing her into increasingly risky behavior. The next phase of our investigation would require us to move from passive observation to active surveillance, a step that would either provide the evidence we needed to involve law enforcement or put us in serious legal jeopardy ourselves if we crossed lines we didn't fully understand. Our stakeout of Westside Storage began at dawn, with Marcus positioned strategically behind an abandoned fast food restaurant that provided clear sightlines to the facility entrance, while keeping us completely invisible to anyone coming or going from the storage complex. The waiting game that followed tested every ounce of patience I possessed, but Marcus's decades of investigative experience had taught him that the most important evidence often required the most boring and methodical surveillance work imaginable. His professional telephoto lens captured license plates, faces, and activities with military precision, while I maintained detailed logs of times, descriptions, and any notable behaviors we observed throughout the long morning hours. The facility itself was much larger than I'd expected from driving past it casually, with dozens of climate-controlled units and a surprisingly steady stream of legitimate customers that provided perfect cover for any illegal activities that might be taking place within its chain-link confines. As morning wore on and the legitimate traffic increased with people accessing their stored belongings, we began to see patterns emerging that suggested our suspicions might be justified in ways we hadn't fully anticipated or prepared ourselves to handle. The professional nature of some of the vehicles and the coordination between certain individuals suggested this wasn't just a local operation, but something with broader scope and more serious implications than simple neighborhood theft. The first major revelation came when Marcus's lens focused on a familiar 1965 Mustang being carefully wheeled out of Unit 47B, a car I immediately recognized as belonging to the Hendersons, who lived 2 streets over from me and had been struggling with mounting financial pressures. Mrs. Henderson had mentioned at a recent HOA meeting that they were being forced to sell their beloved car due to mounting maintenance costs and property tax increases, financial pressures that seemed to coincide suspiciously with a sudden increase in HOA violation notices for minor infractions like grass height and fence paint color. Behind the Mustang came Marcus's own 1974 Harley-Davidson, a bike he'd reported stolen 3 months earlier, after what had appeared to be a very selective burglary that had left everything else in his garage completely untouched, including more valuable tools and equipment. The sight of his own stolen motorcycle being treated as legitimate inventory, being prepared for transport, was both vindicating and deeply infuriating, confirming that our investigation was uncovering something far more extensive than a 20-police agent simple car theft scheme targeting individual vehicles. Marcus's professional composure cracked slightly as he watched his beloved Harley being loaded onto a transport trailer with casual efficiency that suggested this was routine business rather than criminal activity, and I could see the personal anger that was fueling his determination to see this investigation through to its conclusion regardless of personal risk or legal complications. The scope of the operation became crystal clear as we documented additional vehicles and valuable items being moved in and out of the facility throughout the morning hours, each one representing someone's pride, joy, or financial necessity that had been systematically transformed into criminal inventory. Mrs. Patterson's 1924 Steinway piano, carefully crated and ready for shipping, with professional packaging materials, appeared on a dolly being pushed by workers who handled it with the kind of casual indifference that made my heart ache for the elderly woman who'd been convinced to sell her grandmother's precious instrument for a fraction of its actual value. The pattern was becoming undeniable and deeply disturbing. Valuable items were being systematically harvested from neighborhood residents through a carefully orchestrated combination of financial pressure, bureaucratic manipulation, outright theft, then consolidated at this facility for distribution to buyers who either didn't know or didn't care about the item's questionable provenance and illegal acquisition. The sophistication of the operation suggested coordination between multiple parties and access to resources that went far beyond what Beverly could manage independently with her real estate connections and HOA authority. This was organized crime operating under the cover of legitimate business and community governance, exploiting the trust and vulnerability of suburban homeowners who never suspected their neighbors and elected officials of systematic criminal behavior. My call to Agent Rebecca Taylor at Homeland Security Investigations was initially met with polite skepticism, until I began describing the detailed pattern of cross-state vehicle movements and the potential international destination points that Emily had identified through her legal research into International Auto Ventures business operations. Agent Taylor's tone shifted dramatically when I mentioned the Dubai connection and provided her with specific container numbers and shipping manifests that Emily had somehow managed to access through her legal research databases, professional contacts. The federal interest in cultural property trafficking and the broader implications of organized theft rings targeting American communities transformed our neighborhood dispute into a matter of national security and international law and enforcement cooperation with serious diplomatic implications. Agent Taylor's immediate request for detailed documentation and her insistence on real-time coordination suggested that we'd stumbled onto something that federal agencies had been tracking through other channels, making our evidence potentially crucial to a much larger investigation that had been developing for months or possibly years. The revelation that our small suburban community was apparently a node in an international trafficking network was both shocking and somehow not entirely surprising, given the sophistication of the local operations we'd been documenting. The container shipping revelation added unprecedented urgency to an already complex situation. As Agent Taylor explained the federal requirements for building a case that would survive international legal challenges and potential extradition proceedings if the network extended beyond American borders. The vehicles and other valuable items needed to be caught in the actual act of being loaded for international shipment, with clear documentation of their stolen status and proper chain of custody for all evidence we'd collected through amateur investigation. Our neighborhood surveillance was about to become part of a coordinated federal operation that would require precision timing coordination between multiple agencies and adherence to legal standards that left absolutely no room for the kind of informal neighborly confrontation that had started this whole investigation. Agent Taylor's comprehensive briefing on federal surveillance protocols and evidence requirements was both exciting and terrifying, transforming us from concerned citizens into reluctant participants in a law enforcement operation with international implications and potential diplomatic consequences. The weight of responsibility for ensuring that serious criminals faced appropriate justice rather than escaping through legal technicalities was becoming almost overwhelming as the scope of the operation continued to expand beyond anything we'd initially imagined. The maritime shipping schedules that Agent Taylor shared with us revealed a critical time constraint that would determine the success or failure of the entire operation. The next container ship bound for Dubai was scheduled to depart in TPNS, less than 72 hours, meaning that if our stolen property was going to be moved internationally, it would happen within the next 2 days, or wait for the following month's shipping schedule. The federal timeline for intervention required us to maintain our surveillance while staying completely clear of any activities that might compromise the official investigation or endanger the broader operation targeting what appeared to be a multi-state theft and trafficking network with international connections. Agent Taylor's emphasis on letting the criminals complete their intended actions before intervention felt counterintuitive, but was essential for building cases that would result in serious prison time rather than simple plea bargains to minor charges that would allow the network to continue operating. The waiting game was about to become exponentially more intense as federal agents positioned themselves around the port facility and coordinated with local law enforcement for what promised to be a dramatic culmination to our neighborhood investigation with implications that extended far beyond recovering stolen cars and antiques. Marcus's military background and professional investigative experience proved invaluable as we coordinated our civilian surveillance with federal requirements while maintaining operational security that would prevent Beverly or her associates from detecting the law enforcement presence that was quietly surrounding their operation. His understanding of surveillance protocols and evidence documentation procedures ensured that our amateur investigation would support, rather than compromise, the federal case being built around our discoveries and the broader investigation into the trafficking network. The transformation from concerned neighbor to federal witness was surreal but necessary, and Marcus's steady guidance helped me navigate the complex legal and ethical considerations that came with our evolving role in what was becoming a significant criminal investigation with potential international ramifications. His military experience with classified operations and understanding of operational security proved crucial as we balanced our desire to protect our community with the need to avoid interfering with federal law enforcement procedures and protocols. Jake Thompson's willingness to provide additional technical information about Beverly's surveillance equipment installation proved crucial for understanding the full scope of her surveillance capabilities and the potential security risks to other community members. His detailed description of the camera network's capabilities and remote access features suggested that Beverly had been conducting comprehensive surveillance of multiple households, gathering intelligence about valuable possessions, daily routines, and security vulnerabilities that could be exploited for theft or manipulation. The realization that our private lives had been systematically monitored and cataloged for criminal purposes added a personal violation element to what had started as a property dispute and evolved into a federal investigation. Jake's decision to cooperate fully with the investigation, despite potential liability for his unwitting assistance in installing criminal surveillance equipment, demonstrated the community's growing commitment to exposing and stopping the criminal operations that had been exploiting their trust and vulnerability. As the federal operation moved into its final preparation phase, the next 24 hours would determine whether months of criminal activity would be exposed and prosecuted, or whether the network would escape to continue their operations in other communities with other victims. The convergence of federal law enforcement, international shipping schedules, and our community-based investigation created a perfect storm of opportunity and risk that would either deliver justice or allow serious criminals to escape consequences for their systematic exploitation of American communities and families. Harold Green's phone call came at exactly 6:47 a.m., precisely calculated to catch me before my first cup of coffee, when my psychological defenses would be at their lowest point, and my ability to think clearly would be compromised by early morning grogginess. His voice carried the practiced authority of someone accustomed to intimidating people into submission through psychological manipulation, but there was an underlying desperation that suggested his carefully constructed criminal empire was beginning to crumble under federal scrutiny and investigation. Harold's attempt to gaslight me about my father's supposed corruption and cover-up activities was both sophisticated and deeply personal, attacking not just my current situation but the memory of the man whose integrity and moral courage had shaped my entire worldview and professional ethics. The psychological manipulation was expertly crafted, designed to make me doubt not just my father's honesty but my own judgment in pursuing this investigation and potentially destroying innocent people's lives in the process of seeking justice. His suggestion that I was naively stumbling into a situation that would hurt everyone involved, including myself and my family, carried just enough truth to be genuinely unsettling and make me question whether I was in over my head and causing more harm than good. The timing of the call coming just as federal agents were positioning themselves for the final phase of their operation suggested that Harold was aware of the increased law enforcement pressure and was attempting to manipulate me into abandoning the investigation before it could reach its conclusion. But Harold's psychological warfare backfired spectacularly when he made the critical error of claiming that my father had been part of a corruption scheme that Harold himself had supposedly exposed decades earlier during their time, working together in federal aviation quality assurance. The timeline didn't match my clear memories of Dad's forced early retirement and the family's financial struggles that followed, and more importantly, Harold's intimate knowledge of details that should have been confidential suggested he was far more involved in the original situation than he was admitting. His attempt to position himself as the reluctant whistleblower who'd saved the federal agency from my father's supposed misconduct felt forced and rehearsed, like someone who'd practiced this story many times but never had to defend it against someone who actually knew the real timeline of events and had access to family documents and memories. The conversation ended with Harold's barely veiled threat that continuing this investigation would result in public humiliation for my family and legal consequences that would follow me for the rest of my life, a threat that confirmed everything I needed to know about his character and intentions, while simultaneously strengthening my resolve to see the investigation through to its conclusion. The fact that Harold was attempting to manipulate me through threats against my father's memory suggested that he was desperate and running out of other options for stopping the federal investigation that was closing in around his criminal network. The federal operation at the port began at 5:47 a.m., with Agent Taylor's team positioning themselves in a carefully coordinated pattern that surrounded container BVLG 2024 without appearing to focus on any specific location or activity that might alert the criminals to law enforcement presence. The precision of the federal operation was both impressive and slightly terrifying, with agents maintaining casual civilian appearances while communicating through nearly invisible earpieces and hand signals that suggested months of training and preparation for exactly this type of situation. The container facility itself was a massive maze of shipping containers, cranes, and vehicles that provided excellent cover for both criminal activity and law enforcement surveillance, creating a complex three-dimensional chess game where every move had to be calculated to avoid compromising the operation or endangering civilian personnel. Agent Taylor's command of the operation was evident in the seamless coordination between multiple agencies, including Customs, FBI, and local law enforcement, and the careful balance between gathering evidence and maintaining operational security until the moment of maximum legal impact. The international implications of the case had attracted attention from federal agencies that normally didn't coordinate on domestic investigations, suggesting that the trafficking network had connections and implications that extended far beyond stolen cars and antiques from suburban communities. Beverly's arrival at the port driving a rental truck followed by 2 additional vehicles filled with men I didn't recognize marked the beginning of the final phase of what had started as a neighborhood dispute and evolved into an international criminal investigation with serious national security implications. Her manifest listed 9 high-value items, including my father's Shelby Cobra, Marcus's Harley Mrs., Patterson's Steinway piano, and several other pieces that represented decades of community members' most treasured possessions being systematically stolen and shipped overseas for profit. The casual efficiency with which the loading operation proceeded suggested this was routine business rather than criminal activity, with each team member knowing exactly their role in what appeared to be a well-rehearsed process of transforming stolen American heritage into international profits. Beverly's confidence throughout the loading process was remarkable, given the federal surveillance surrounding her, suggesting either complete ignorance of her situation or remarkable self-control under pressure that indicated significant experience with similar operations. The professional nature of the loading equipment and the coordination between the various team members suggested that this wasn't Beverly's first international shipping operation, and that the criminal network had been operating successfully for a considerable period of time. The moment that would later become a viral sensation and provide crucial evidence for federal prosecutors occurred when Beverly decided to live-stream the shipping operation on her social media accounts, apparently believing that documenting her activities would somehow legitimize them or provide legal protection against future accusations of criminal behavior. Her live stream began normally with professional lighting and clear audio, but quickly descended into technical chaos as her phone's connection became unstable, creating a robotic audio effect that made her sound like a malfunctioning artificial intelligence trying to explain criminal activity to confused viewers. The chat section exploded with comments like, "Karen, EEXE has stopped working," and "Ma'am, this is a Wendy's turning her attempted propaganda into an unintentional comedy show that would be screen captured and shared across social media platforms for months afterward." The visual of Beverly frantically trying to fix her phone while federal agents closed in around her created a perfect metaphor for the complete failure of her sophisticated criminal scheme and the collapse of years of careful planning under the pressure of federal investigation. Her attempts to maintain composure while clearly panicking about the technical difficulties provided both comic relief and damaging evidence of her knowledge that what she was doing was illegal and required justification to an audience. Beverly's emotional breakdown when confronted with federal arrest warrants and clear evidence of her involvement in international trafficking was both satisfying and somewhat pitiful, transforming the confident HOA president into a crying, desperate woman who claimed she'd been forced into criminal activity by Harold's manipulation and financial threats. Her confession that Harold maintained detailed files on every community member, including personal secrets, financial vulnerabilities, and potential legal exposure, revealed the sophisticated psychological control mechanisms that had enabled the entire operation to function without detection for so long. The scope of Harold's surveillance and manipulation network extended far beyond simple theft, encompassing blackmail, financial manipulation, and systematic exploitation of elderly community members who trusted their neighborhood leadership to act in their best interests, rather than as predators seeking to exploit their vulnerability. Beverly's willingness to provide detailed information about Harold's operations in exchange for reduced charges marked the beginning of the end for what appeared to be a criminal enterprise that had been operating successfully for several years across multiple states and communities. Her detailed knowledge of other operations and victims suggested that the investigation would expand significantly beyond our small community and potentially involve dozens of other victims who had no idea they'd been targeted by organized criminals. Harold's arrival at the port in his personal vehicle, apparently unaware that federal agents had been monitoring his communications and movements for the previous 48 hours, demonstrated the kind of overconfidence that eventually destroys even the most sophisticated criminal operations. His calm demeanor when presented with arrest warrants and extensive evidence of his involvement in the theft and trafficking network suggested either remarkable self-control or complete disconnection from the reality of his legal situation and the severity of federal charges he was facing. Agent Taylor's professional handling of Harold's arrest contrasted sharply with Beverly's emotional breakdown, creating a scene that felt like the climax of a crime drama, but was happening in real time with real consequences. For real people whose lives had been systematically destroyed by criminal exploitation. Harold's final statement that I should ask my sister about a safety deposit box key added one more layer of mystery to an already complex situation, suggesting that even in defeat, Harold was still playing psychological games designed to manipulate and control the narrative surrounding his criminal activities. The fact that he knew about family financial arrangements that should have been completely private confirmed the extent of his surveillance and investigation of my family's background and vulnerabilities. The recovery of stolen property from the container revealed the true scope of the trafficking operation, with investigators discovering not just vehicles and antiques, but also important documents, family heirlooms, and irreplaceable personal items that represented lifetimes of work and family history. The systematic documentation of each item and its original owner painted a picture of criminal operations that had destroyed dozens of families' financial security and emotional well-being through the theft of irreplaceable possessions and memories. Agent Taylor's explanation of the international market for American antiques and classic cars revealed economic incentives that made this type of criminal activity extremely profitable and attractive to organized crime networks, looking for lower-risk alternatives to drug trafficking and other traditional criminal enterprises. The investigation's expansion to include federal agencies responsible for protecting cultural heritage and preventing the export of American historical artifacts added another dimension to the case and increased the potential penalties for everyone involved in the criminal network. Emily's hands shook slightly as she turned the safety deposit box key that Harold had somehow known about, revealing contents that would completely reverse everything I thought I knew about my father's final years and Harold's role in his early retirement from the Federal Aviation Quality Assurance Department. The cassette tape marked 1995. Insurance policy contained Harold's voice, clearly threatening my father with complete career destruction unless he agreed to overlook critical safety violations in military aircraft. Manufacturing violations that could have resulted in pilot deaths and catastrophic equipment failures during overseas combat operations in the Middle East. Dad's response, captured in his characteristic calm but determined tone, was to inform Harold that he would be reporting the attempted bribery and safety violations to federal authorities, regardless of personal consequences, choosing integrity over career security, in a decision that ultimately cost him his pension and professional reputation, but potentially saved countless military personnel's lives. The handwritten letter accompanying the cassette, addressed to my children in Dad's familiar, careful script, explained his decision to secretly record Harold's threats and maintain comprehensive evidence of the corruption he discovered, creating insurance against Harold's promise to destroy his reputation and prevent him from ever working in aerospace again. The revelation that Dad had anticipated Harold's retaliation and prepared evidence to protect his family's understanding of the truth was both heartbreaking and inspiring, showing the depth of his moral courage and his concern for our opinion of his character and integrity. The complete revelation that my father had been the whistleblower rather than the corrupt official completely reframed not only my understanding of his character but the entire moral landscape of Harold's decades-long criminal career that had apparently begun with federal aviation contracts and evolved into community-based theft and international trafficking operations. Dad's detailed letter explained his discovery of Harold's scheme to approve substandard parts for military aircraft in exchange for substantial financial kickbacks from defense contractors, a conspiracy that could have resulted in catastrophic failures during combat operations in the escalating Middle East conflicts throughout the 1992nd. Harold's retaliation against Dad's honesty had been swift, comprehensive, and devastatingly effective, using his connections within the federal bureaucracy to frame Dad as the corrupt official while positioning himself as the reluctant whistleblower who'd saved the agency from scandal and potential loss of life. The emotional impact of learning that Dad's professional disgrace had actually been the result of his moral courage rather than ethical failure was overwhelming, transforming 30 years of family shame and financial struggle into a legacy of integrity that Harold had tried to destroy but ultimately failed to eliminate completely. The documentation Dad had maintained included copies of the original safety reports, records of his communications with federal investigators, and detailed accounts of Harold's threats and attempts at intimidation, creating a comprehensive record that vindicated his actions and exposed Harold's criminal behavior spanning multiple decades. Harold's plea negotiations with federal prosecutors revealed the staggering extent of his criminal network and the sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques he'd perfected over decades of operating within positions of authority and trust throughout various government agencies and community organizations. His admission that he'd never intended to hurt anyone, combined with his claim that he simply couldn't stop once the financial benefits became addictive, painted a picture of someone who'd gradually descended from white-collar corruption into systematic criminal behavior that had destroyed dozens of families and communities across multiple states. The federal investigation that followed Harold's cooperation revealed direct connections to similar operations in at least 7 other states, all targeting affluent communities with aging populations and valuable personal property. that could be manipulated through bureaucratic pressure and legal intimidation tactics. Harold's comprehensive insurance files contain detailed psychological profiles of community leaders, extensive financial vulnerability assessments of target families, and meticulous documentation of bribes paid to officials in multiple jurisdictions, creating a comprehensive map of corruption that would fuel federal investigations for years to come and potentially implicate dozens of other officials and community leaders who had been compromised by Harold's systematic approach to criminal recruitment and control. The community transformation that followed Harold's arrest and Beverly's confession was both inspiring and essential for healing the profound damage that years of manipulation and systematic theft had inflicted on neighborhood trust and social cohesion throughout Meadowbrook Hills. The immediate dissolution of the existing HOA board and the establishment of a completely transparent resident council with rotating leadership and open financial records ensured that future community governance would be directly accountable to residents rather than external criminal interests or corrupt officials seeking to exploit their positions. Mrs. Patterson's decision to use her recovered Steinway piano as the centerpiece of a community music therapy program created a healing space where neighbors could process the trauma of betrayal while rebuilding social connections that had been deliberately undermined by Harold's divide-and-conquer tactics designed to isolate potential victims and prevent community solidarity. Marcus's unanimous election as the first president of the new resident council brought professional investigative experience and military discipline to community leadership, ensuring that future problems would be addressed with competence and integrity, rather than hidden agendas and criminal manipulation designed to benefit external interests at the expense of community welfare and security. Jake Thompson's transformation, from neighborhood electrician to founder of Thompson Security Services, specializing in protecting elderly homeowners from financial exploitation and property theft, demonstrated how criminal victimization could inspire positive community change and professional innovation that would benefit other potential victims. His security systems were specifically designed to detect and document the kind of surveillance and manipulation tactics that Harold and Beverly had used to target vulnerable residents, creating both protection and evidence collection, capabilities that could prevent similar schemes from succeeding in other communities across the region. The David Miller Technical Training Center, established with funds recovered from Harold's criminal enterprise through federal asset forfeiture proceedings, would provide comprehensive automotive and aviation maintenance training for underprivileged youth while honoring Dad's memory and ensuring that his technical expertise would continue to benefit future generations. Eleanor, the 1967 Shelby Cobra that had started this entire investigation, became the centerpiece of the training center's classic car restoration program, transforming a symbol of attempted theft into a tool for education and community empowerment that would train young people in valuable technical skills while preserving automotive heritage. The broader implications of our neighborhood investigation extended far beyond the recovery of stolen property and the punishment of individual criminals, highlighting systemic vulnerabilities in community governance and elderly protection that required ongoing attention and comprehensive reform at multiple levels of government. The federal legislation that resulted from Harold's case created new oversight requirements for HOA operations and enhanced penalties for schemes targeting senior citizens, while also providing substantial resources for communities to identify and prevent similar criminal operations before they could establish themselves and cause extensive damage. Agent Taylor's formal commendation of our civilian investigation emphasized the crucial importance of community vigilance and cooperation with law enforcement, while providing clear warnings against vigilante activities that could compromise legal proceedings and endanger innocent people caught in complex criminal situations. The delicate balance between community self-protection and respect for legal procedures became a model for other neighborhoods dealing with similar challenges, proving that ordinary citizens could effectively combat sophisticated criminal operations when they worked together with appropriate professional guidance and federal support, rather than attempting to handle complex criminal investigations independently. The international ramifications of the case extended beyond simple property recovery to include diplomatic discussions about cultural heritage protection and the prevention of American historical artifacts from being trafficked to overseas markets where their provenance couldn't be verified or their cultural significance properly preserved. The Dubai connection had revealed a broader network of international buyers who were either unaware of or indifferent to the criminal origins of the American antiques and classic cars they were purchasing, leading to increased cooperation between American and Middle Eastern law enforcement agencies to track and prevent such trafficking operations. The case became a model for federal agencies dealing with similar cultural property crimes, demonstrating how community-level investigations could provide crucial intelligence for much larger federal operations, targeting international criminal networks that operated across multiple jurisdictions and legal systems. Mrs. Patterson's recovery of her grandmother's Steinway piano marked not just a personal victory but a symbol of community resilience and the power of neighbors standing together against exploitation and criminal manipulation. Her decision to share the piano's music with the entire community through regular concerts and music education programs transformed a symbol of near loss into a celebration of community, unity, and cultural preservation. The piano's restoration became a community project that brought together neighbors who had been isolated and suspicious of each other due to Harold's manipulation, creating new friendships and social connections that strengthened the community's ability to resist future criminal infiltration and exploitation. This experience taught me that justice isn't just about punishment or recovering stolen property. It's about communities choosing to protect each other, especially the most vulnerable among us who can't protect themselves against sophisticated criminal operations. When neighbors stand together against those who exploit trust and authority for personal gain, we create something stronger than any criminal enterprise can destroy through manipulation or intimidation. Dad's legacy wasn't tarnished by Harold's lies and false accusations. It was proven and validated by a 30-year-old cassette tape and a community that refused to let corruption define their future or destroy their faith in human decency. Sometimes the most ordinary people, armed with nothing but determination and moral clarity, can expose extraordinary crimes and transform entire systems of accountability that have been corrupted by criminal infiltration. The real victory wasn't recovering stolen property or seeing criminals punished, though both were important. It was rebuilding the trust that makes communities worth protecting in the first place and proving that integrity and courage can triumph over corruption and criminal manipulation. If you've experienced HOA abuse, financial exploitation, or community corruption, you're not alone, and you're not powerless against these sophisticated criminal operations. Share your story in the comments below, because every voice matters in exposing these schemes and protecting other potential victims from similar exploitation. Hit that subscribe button for Karen Stories 9, where we continue documenting how regular people fight back against those who abuse positions of trust and authority. The playlist of previous episodes shows different tactics and outcomes from communities across America, proving that justice takes many forms but always starts with someone refusing to accept that corruption is just how things work. Your support helps us investigate and share these stories, creating a growing community of people who believe that accountability and integrity still matter in America. Together, we can make sure that criminals who exploit community trust face the consequences of their actions, and that vulnerable community